All right. Okay, I think we can get started. I hope you guys had a fun interactive last session. Love the questions coming in. Keep them coming in. But for our last session today, joining us today are medical students from Inspira Advantage, Andrew and Lois. Andrew is the fourth-year medical student at the Ohio State University College of Medicine. He has research interests in cartilage restoration and patellar instability. He has multiple experiences guiding pre-medical students, you guys, through the admissions process. And Lois is a third-year medical student at Harvard Medical School. She currently conducts vascular survey research at the Massachusetts General Hospital. She has won numerous awards during her undergraduate years, including Dean's Honored Graduate with distinctions in research and diversity, equity, and inclusion. So please give a warm welcome to Lois and Andrew, and also I'll switch the presentation.
Wonderful.
Right.
Awesome.
Take
Thank
it
you so
away.
much, Ting. Yeah. Thanks so much for the introduction. So we are going to be presenting a deck of slides today, focused on writing a great, not just a good, but a great pre-health personal statement. And we are members of Inspira Advantage. And as Ting said, I'm Lois, and I'll go ahead and let you introduce yourself, Andrew.
Sure. So I'm Andrew. Thanks for the introduction, Ting. I've been with Inspira for about a year now, helped multiple students get into med school. It's been really rewarding for me, and I'm sure for Lois as well. Just helping kind of that next, not necessarily generation, because I feel like we're all still kind of the same generation, but that next kind of wave of med students get in. So we got a great presentation for you today, and we're excited to get into it.
Awesome. So the agenda for our discussion today will be, one, we'll be talking about what is important in a personal statement. We'll talk about the parts that are involved in a strong personal statement. We'll then talk about how to think about writing it, so the actual writing process, and then how to end the personal statement. We'll give a brief outline about how to sort of think about it as a big picture, and then we'll also review common mistakes to avoid and things to make sure that you do, and then we'll leave time at the end for Q&A. All right.
So a little on Inspira, we're basically an admissions consulting firm. We work with pre-health students, so pre-med students, pre-PA, pre-vet as well. 15 years plus of experience. You can see our acceptance rates really high, and you're almost like 5 times more likely to get a scholarship than if you just apply alone. So I know a lot of people, when I was applying, I was talking to Ting backstage about this, but I needed a lot of help from my mentors applying into med school, and so we see it kind of as our way to be mentors for somebody else.
All right, so then we'll start with the first portion, which is understanding what goes into it. So your personal statement essentially is your way of introducing yourself to the admissions team at all these different medical schools or PA schools or PT schools. Since you're not able to talk to them directly, your personal statement serves as a way for you to do that. And what it should be doing is it should be able to show who you are, right? What kind of experiences you've had, what kind of personality you have, and why you want to become a pre-PA, pre-MD, pre-RN person, or like why you want to enter those programs. And then it should talk about what your values and goals are and how they align with the values and goals of these institutions. And then lastly, it should highlight all of your strengths, including, what skills you've developed, what grades you have, and this portion doesn't directly go into the personal statement, but it goes into your entire application, right? This would be like your grades, your test scores, your letter of recommendations. And the reason I think it's important to put this at the end is because those things don't need to go into your personal statement. You don't need to rehash your grades or rehash your resume, since that'll be part of your application already.
Yeah, exactly like what Lois was saying. It's your chance to be unique and show you why you're more than your grades and why you're more than your experiences. And I always say it's a way to show what those experiences have meant to you and why they will, and connect them to why you will be a successful med student, successful PA, veterinary student, or what have you. And it's a little deeper dive on what makes you tick, than just your grades and your GPA.
Now we're going to talk about what are the main components of a really strong personal statement. So one of the most important parts of a personal statement is your why. Why am I applying to this particular field in healthcare? What is it about my experiences that has brought me to this point? Who inspires me? Who motivates me? And what is it? Why? What is my motivation? And usually what people can successfully do is they talk about this in the form of anecdotes. So essentially you would, as Andrew said, you're essentially telling us about your experiences and then connecting these experiences and anecdotes with your why. So maybe you volunteered at the hospital and you connected with the patient and you found that this connection with the patient is one of the reasons that you were motivated to pursue medicine. Or maybe you were doing some research and you found that like the things that you found in that lab while you were doing research really motivated your interest in physical therapy or your interest in veterinary medicine. But it shows your reasons and it also shows the experiences you have that connect to those reasons.
Yeah, and then it's another opportunity to just highlight the things that were important to you, highlighting your achievements, the things that you've accomplished. You guys are all, if you're applying into these pre-health schools, are all very successful students, through at least the undergrad phase that you've gotten to. And the problem I think some people will run into with the personal statements is just make it a laundry list of kind of all their achievements. But it's more about showing, why those achievements matter to you, why those things will help you become a good doctor or a good PA. I think I've said a couple times now, but it's reflecting on your growth and how those experiences have shaped you.
And most importantly, you really want to be yourself, right? A lot of people sometimes when they're writing these things start to sound really grandiose, like they are already physicians or they're already veterinary personnel, but you're not, right? You're growing, you have unique personalities, you have a character, and we want to showcase that when you're writing too. That way they know you as more than just your achievement and something beyond just a piece of paper.
All right, and now we'll start talking a little bit about how to write that stellar personal statement. So first is there should be like an underlying topic, an underlying theme. Obviously, the main goal of the personal statement is to show why you want to pursue the health field, show you why you'd be a good candidate. But it's always very helpful to have like an underlying theme or topic that kind of you see throughout it. So for example, for mine, I can talk a little bit about my personal statement experience. So I played football growing up. That was really big for me, just in my development as a person, and all the injuries I had that kind of led me towards medicine. And it was at the same time that CTE kind of started coming out in the news. And so that developed the research interest that I talked about. So I kind of had all these connections through football as kind of my underlying topic and theme that connected to the health field and kind of showed why I wanted that to be the next step of my life.
And step 2 is to show off your qualities. One of the things I really love to do when I'm helping students, so before they even start writing, I like to hear about them and their passions and the things that they do that get them excited and wanting to talk. And when we make the laundry list of those, you can pick, like some of those have similar qualities behind them. Maybe you find that you're an activist, or you find that you're really passionate about research, or you're passionate about underserved or like communities that need more resources. If you're able to sort of hone down on those qualities, it's much easier to then start writing about them and find 1 or 2 anecdotes that like underline those qualities. And so when I have students write, sometimes I'll have them start with the anecdotes, start with the stories, but sometimes it might be a little bit easier to think about the qualities first and then attach anecdotes and qualities to them.
Yeah, and that anecdotal strategy really helps with people who can have a tendency to generalize their personal statements. And you have to remember when the admissions committees are reading these, they're reading 20 at a time or 30 at a time. And so you want yours to be very specific, very unique. And so when you're sharing stories, I think it's harder to make it sound like a generic, oh, I like helping people, I want to go into medicine. And so, through sharing stories and those anecdotes, you can make it really personal and kind of have a little bit more reflection and self-growth that you talk about in your personal statement.
Yes. And honestly, the entire theme of all this is effective storytelling. What I tell my students is if you write a paragraph and I can close my eyes as you're reading it to me, and I can visualize myself in that room with you, in that OR with you, in that clinic or volunteer space with you, and I can see this human interaction that's really inspiring or just like really, really emotionally wrought, then I know that that's going to be a good anecdote or a good story, right? Because as Andrew said, our letter readers, our readers are reading 20 or 30 and they're tired and it's 10 p.m. at night. So you want to have these very, very visually compelling stories that'll make them wake up and pop out of their seat and say, what's going on here? Or like, what is so interesting? Or this is very interesting. So always think about not just writing and putting down your skills or your resume, but think about effective storytelling.
Yep. And then final tip, which is, I think, a little bit harder to forget, but just remember to connect it back to medicine. That's overall the goal of the personal statement, trying to get into med school or whatever school you're applying for. So just remember to weave in why your thesis should be why you would make a good doctor or why you want to pursue medicine. So don't leave that out. That's pretty important.
Now we're going to think about how to end the personal statement. You've done all this great work with these anecdotes. You've introduced yourself. They're sitting at the edge of their seat. So what's next? You need to talk about your future plans. And this doesn't have to be like, oh, I'm going to save all these lives, X, Y, and Z, but talk about what it is that you're going to be doing in medical school, right? If I'm coming there, maybe I want to start working with more underserved people in the community. If I'm there, maybe I'm really, really passionate about extending my research work. Maybe I'm passionate about serving overseas or doing other things. And I think when you have this additional nearsighted goal, it's much easier for people to sort of place you in their medical school, right? Because I know that if I accept this person, not only are they going to be a great student, they're also going to be a great advocate. Or not only are they going to be a great student, they're also going to be a great teacher for future medical students or a great teacher for future pre-medical students. So instead of just being vague about, I want to save lives, think about who you want to work with, where you want to work, which communities do you want to work with, and how that is not just going to position you in the future, but what is that going to look like while you're a medical student?
Yeah, and then on top of that, you can talk a little bit about the avenues or the other paths that medicine will allow you to, rather than direct patient care, but advocacy, as we alluded to earlier. Or if you want to talk about systemic change to the healthcare system, you can also talk about those. So there's a lot of different avenues that you can talk about when you're concluding that don't have to just be through direct patient care. So remember to keep those in mind if they're important to you.
And I love this portion, explain how you'd contribute to your school's community and vision, right? Because you're not just going to that school to take something from them, but hopefully you're also there to contribute something. So maybe you are a really good group learner and you love to initiate study groups. Maybe you are just a great advocate for the community and you love to do community outreach. Maybe you love helping other pre-medical students. How is it that when you're there at that school, you're going to contribute to the school's community and to their vision and how you're going to further it? Because they're not just looking for learners, but they're looking for people that are going to be immersed in the community at the institution.
All right, now we can walk through an outline of a great personal statement. So at the beginning, we're going to have an introduction. Every introduction has a good hook. So something attention grabbing that's going to, kind of like Lois said, snap that reader back up. You want to kind of weave in that theme that we were talking about earlier. That's going to be the theme for the personal statement throughout. And then as you get into body paragraph 1, start bringing in one of those anecdotes. I think that's the best strategy to write these.
The next one will be similar to the second, or I guess this is the second paragraph. You'll start with your topic sentence. And this isn't too complicated or too confusing from what you've probably done in your English class, right? You want to keep it simple. Start with the topic sentence. Give me supporting details and evidence. A lot of students will be like, oh, I'm a really great, teacher, and then give us no anecdotes or no supporting evidence of how they've ever taught somebody. So if you're saying that you're a great teacher, or you're a great learner, or you're a great community servant, XYZ, give us examples supporting that. And then you want to end with that statement or sum it up again, summarize it in a different way that keeps us focused on the point of that paragraph. Then you're going to go to the third paragraph and start another topic sentence, kind of similar to the second, give us some evidence and elaborate on the points, and then close it out again.
Yeah, and then I think going back to Lois's point, the word or the phrase that I always use is "show it, don't tell it." People are going to understand if you show something rather than if you tell something, right? So show it through a story rather than just saying I'm a great person, I'm going to be a great doctor. Show us why. But then as you get into the conclusion, summarize those points that you made. Each one of those anecdotes should kind of tell a different story about why you want to pursue medicine or why you'd be a great doctor and a medical student. So kind of tying those together and close with good reflection.
Okay, now this is a big one, common mistakes to avoid. So mentioning your medical knowledge. I know that a lot of us get super excited. You're probably taking anatomy, physiology courses. And if you haven't, that's okay. Or you've been in the clinical environment, either as a volunteer, as a scribe or whatever. I do not think that the personal statement, I know it might sound shocking, the personal statement is not a place to flex your medical knowledge, right? Because you're saying, I want to go to your school to learn. So if you've already learned these things, then they might be asking, why do you want to go to medical school, right? What it's there for instead is for you to talk about your experiences. So try to avoid using technical terms because they could be incorrect, they could be outdated, or they could just sort of make you look bad. Secondly is exaggerating your achievements. Some people, the way that they'll describe and they'll write seems as if they've just cured cancer or they've saved someone from like a life-threatening illness. Firstly, you're not certified to do that, most likely. And then secondly, again, it makes you look more pompous and like more like too sure of yourself, right? Again, you're saying that I want to go to your institution to be a learner, and to say that and to do that requires a bit of humility. So try not to use generalized or exaggerating language or oversweeping language, right? And then lastly, this is the other end of the spectrum, is downplaying your achievements. You've done some wonderful things. And if you're going to say that you are X kind of person, don't be afraid to fully give the details that support that descriptor or term that you're trying to own. So fully own it, showcase your strengths, tell the story. And if you feel like it's too much or too little, have someone else read it so that they can tell you, is it coming off too big or coming off too small? And you can find that middle ground.
And then last 3 points here, don't repeat yourself. I think we've talked about this a little bit, but don't just give us a laundry list of your application. They already have that. Readers don't want to read all of that again. They want to know why you want to be a doctor and what those experiences have meant to you. And then, a lot of people like to use the cliches like, I've wanted to be a doctor since I was little because I want to help people. And, my parents were a doctor or something like that. It just gets old when you're reading them, when you're reading a bunch of those sentences over and over again. So try and make yours unique and very personal. And if you make it a real reflection of you, everybody has unique reasons for wanting to be a doctor and unique experience to getting to that point. So it's very easy to not write something that somebody else has done, because if you're honest in telling your story, you have your own personal story and you're the only one with that story. So the last point here, not revising. It's a pretty important essay that you're writing here. So definitely you want to proofread, make sure there's no spelling errors, make sure you're within the word count. That's a big one. Sometimes the word count from like a Word doc doesn't necessarily translate into the application portal's word count. So make sure when you copy and paste that into the portal that you're fitting it all within there. But otherwise, just make sure the grammar is good, well written. Make sure there's no spelling mistakes, things like that.
All right. Now we're going to open the floor up for any questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Andrew and Lois, for going through a very comprehensive list again of like walking us through and writing a personal statement. So to start off, one of our audience asked, would it be a red flag if the examples you use in your personal statement aren't clinical experience, but other experiences like being a caregiver or being involved in research?
Well, I would first say that being a caregiver is actually a clinical experience, right? When you're there in an environment where you're caring for another person, or just like in the same, the way that I always say it is in the same space where you're breathing air as another patient, that's a clinical experience. Even if you're volunteering or shadowing, you can use any of those. But I think being a caregiver is a great example to use, and research is also great as well. So these aren't red flags. These are actually great variations.
Yeah, and I think when people are reading your personal statements, you're not expected to be a doctor at this point, right? You've gone through undergrad. You're not expected to have your whole life dedicated to clinical experience. So it should be real experiences that have meant a lot to you. And so nobody really expects you to have these 3 great patient stories that will help you through the rest of the time. So absolutely.
Thank you. And so what would you recommend would be a good length for the personal statement? Should you be aiming to write up to the 5,300 5,300 characters allowed? Is there a sweet spot for making sure that it is a great personal statement without being like too vague, like, but also not being like that you're rambling on forever?
Yeah, I find that after someone does the introductory paragraph with their like 3 things that they want to talk about, then the 3 paragraphs that they talk about and the conclusions, that's about maybe 4 or 5 paragraphs. I think you're basically hitting the 5,300 characters allowed. And usually, honestly, what I find is most students go over and we spend a lot of time pruning it down. So I would say like when you're first writing, especially the first couple of drafts, don't even think about the character count, just write, because it's the quality and the content that we care about first. And then you can use another iteration of editing to just prune it down.
Totally agree with all that.
Awesome. So, looking back, especially now that you're 3rd year, 4th year, wrapping up medical school, what piece of advice would you give to your younger self? Look, if you were to start this process, then.
It's a good question. I think for me, I would say don't hesitate to reach out to potential mentors. I think it can be a little intimidating, and I know I was definitely a little intimidated to reach out to somebody who I went to the same undergrad school with, but had never talked to before. People love helping kind of that next generation, and every time I've reached out to somebody, I've gotten a great like yes, definitely let's meet up for a coffee or something, and like I'd love to walk you through things. So just yeah, don't be afraid of throwing yourself out there and reaching out to people for help.
Yeah. I would also say that this is something I did when I was a junior, but I didn't, or sophomore/junior, but I didn't realize that I was doing it, but it's been helping me like throughout, is that even when you're not sort of going through the cycle, coming to events like this where you're learning about the interview process or learning about the application process is helpful, because you don't really want, or at least I think it's a little bit anxiety inducing when you're learning about parts of the process, like as you're going through the process, kind of anxiety inducing. So like as a sophomore or junior, I would go to these types of talks like these, or like speak to people who've been through the process to know what it's like end to end. That way you can kind of foresee places where you might have issues, or foresee places where you're going to need extra help, right? And I've done this too. My partner has applied for residency, and I'm applying in like another year. So it feels like have gone through the residency application process twice. So I feel more comfortable about the entire process whenever I've like sort of walked through it with somebody else much earlier beforehand. So that's the one thing I think I would recommend, is like, if you are not someone that gets too much anxiety over knowing information early on, I would try to get the information early on so you can kind of think ahead.
Thank you. No, that's so amazing to offer that advice, especially for a lot of us who are going or about to start this process. And then kind of zooming out, since clinical experience obviously is really important in the process and talking in your personal statement. So one of our audience asked, would a PCT, a patient care technician position at universities, hospital, count as a clinical experiment, or clinical experience, especially if they're trying to get into that? Or what would you recommend for clinical experience? Let's like open it up.
Yeah, I think
Go ahead, Andrew.
for sure. Yeah, no, any position I think that is patient facing is how I describe it. It counts as clinical experience, whether that's PCT, phlebotomist, scribe, even. So anything where you're in the room with the patient at the same time as somebody, as a physician or somebody else, or if you're in there by yourself, I think that counts as personal clinical experience.
Yeah, my short term is if you're breathing the same air as that patient, that's clinical experience.
Right. And so I know we talked about during the presentation about showing our experiences rather than telling people. So what are some examples, I think more descriptively, of how you can show and not tell? Yeah.
I'm actually helping someone write something right now, so I have like one in my mind. So we had talked about one of the key or the terms they wanted to use was empathetic listening. And I was like, that's great. It's a great phrase. If you're trying to say that you're an empathetic listener, I love that. It sounds very compelling. When did you do that? Tell me the story first. And she had told me a story about how she was a patient care technician and the patient was not able to talk. They just had a stroke. And he looked like he was in distress and she wanted to figure out what could she do to really help him. So she kept listing options. Do you need me to help you go take a shower? Do you need me to help you go to the bathroom? Do you need me to feed you? And he nodded. And that was very compelling to me because yes, this person can't talk, but you're giving them options for what they want to do. And they're giving you an answer and you're listening to it and you're following through. So she fed him and he got better, or he felt better. So I think that's what I mean by like, if you're going to say that you are a really good researcher, that might even be a very generic one. Give us a story. Tell us if you can sit and tell someone this story and they're like, yeah, that is this word or that phrase. That's what I mean by showing, not telling.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, when Lois is talking about that example, a similar one comes to mind for me, which is totally different topic, but the best personal statement I think that I read last year was somebody who wrote about tutoring, just undergraduate tutoring, right? And they were helping another peer who was just really, really struggling. But it showed their high EQ. That showed that they were compassionate and wanted to help this person who was struggling. And it also, I think part of the other thing that we didn't really touch on really was that there was a problem. And then it showed all these different options for them to fix it, right? So you kind of want to come off, or sorry, you want to show your examples of problem solving in this too. So show that you can work through some adversity and that you're flexible because a lot of those skills will help you as you progress in medicine for sure.
Awesome. No, that's amazing to hear. I think we always hear show, not tell, and it's really good, nice to hear like descriptive examples of what that means. And more zooming out, I guess, more about like how medical schools look at applicants is someone asked, what do you think is like a medical school's like view on an applicant who has retook classes? This person in particular had a 3.0 GPA coming in as a sophomore and is a little worried that that GPA might be a factor hurting their application.
Yeah. I think some institutions won't even allow you to retake a class unless you failed the class. I also wouldn't like waste energy or time or money because college is money, right? I wouldn't waste time retaking a class just because you didn't get an A in the class. There are a couple of things I would do if you're really worried about your GPA. Some people do post-bac courses, which are essentially you just take more classes after you've graduated and gotten your bachelor's, and you can sort of beef up your GPA that way. Or you just take more classes as a junior and a senior, and that can usually like dilute whatever low grade you had in the past. But I wouldn't go out of my way to retake a class unless you like failed the class and have to retake it.
Yeah, and I think you said that the example was like they were a sophomore. So I think the other thing that med schools look at is an upward trend, and like if you start off slow in undergrad but you really rev things up as a sophomore, junior, and senior, I think medical schools respect that, and they know that there's definitely a transition period from high school to undergrad. So that's definitely not the end of the world by any means for medical school admissions, but definitely can improve and should want to improve GPA wise.
Right. And then I know we talked about like writing, starting to write, but the process of starting to write a pre-health personal statement can be intimidating. And so what are some tips you have to like get started on the writing?
Yeah,
I
I
think
would
Lois brought it. Yeah, go for it.
I was going to say that I would give myself a lot of time and expect many iterations of this. I think sometimes people get anxiety when it's like the due date is in a month and you have to write an essay in a month. I would give myself like 3-4 months. I know it sounds like a lot, but like you're going to go through a lot of iterations. Personally, when I wrote my personal statement, I wrote it and I was so proud of it. And then I gave it to people to read and they were like, no. And I was like, okay. So I threw the entire thing out and I started over. And the other thing I will say is that sometimes it helps to just talk it out first before you write it, because you can get really bogged down and like, oh, it has to be this way or it has to be this way. If you pick 3 characteristics or pick 3 anecdotes or just pick something that you think is exciting that you want to write about that showcases your white medicine, pick those things, write about it. Sometimes people will even write more than what they're going to put in their essay, but just write, because it's easier to copy paste, write and edit and delete than it is to put new words on paper. So if you just go through the process of just putting a bunch of words on paper, even if it's not grammatically correct, even if the spelling is gross, whatever, you're just telling these stories, do that first, because you'll have a bunch of stuff and you can work from there. Easier to cut than it is to start writing all over again.
Yeah, going along with the lines that Lois is saying, just write your anecdotes. See kind of if you don't have like any idea what you want your theme to be, you want your topic, just write your stories, those like paragraph long stories, and see kind of if there's a theme, if there's something you can make out of it. But just get pen to paper, or I guess fingers to keyboard, probably in most cases, and just get something on there that you can look at. You can have somebody else look at, and they can give you like a third party objective kind of view of where they see your story going, and then you bring in your personal side as well. So just start writing.
Yeah. And
Awesome.
I was going to just to add to this, I would also add that like when you're shadowing or you're volunteering or you're doing clinical experiences and these like really cool interactions happen to you, put them in a little notebook or put them in your notes app or something, because then it's
Definitely.
easier for you to draw from them later on, like 2-3 years later, than it's for you to try to think them all up all over again. So I would just make a running list right now, especially if you have like 1 or 2 years to start developing this list.
It's awesome to hear. I think a lot of us are in that. We sampled earlier today, asked everyone earlier today about their interests or what stage they're at. And there's a lot of 3rd, 4th years. So about to start this process. Yeah, so it's really nice to hear that. And talking specifically about the first paragraph, I know we talked about like a hook that catches them off the beat. What would that look like, that hook? What type of hook would you think is like the most like exceptional like storytelling, or like something that is relatable, personable, and makes this applicant like stand out?
I like it when a personal statement just starts right in the action of an anecdote or right in the action of a story. I This is just my personal opinion, but like when people start with a quote and then talk about like a quote, I've never really liked that. I've never been a huge fan of that. But just like getting like right in there, like I don't know, you're in the middle of a hospital or you're in the middle of a football game for me, example, or something else. It just draws you in, I think, as a reader.
Yeah, I fully agree. I always say, think about someone who is like reading the 10th essay, 10 p.m. at night. They are super drowsy. They're so tired. What are you going to hook them in with? I also detest, not, I guess it's a strong word. I'm not a big fan of the quotes either. I never like people to use them. And something I'll add is I always do the hook last. So you give me your thesis statement, give me all your anecdotes, give me your conclusion. Okay, we've done all that. It's marvelous. It's beautiful. Let's go back to the beginning and talk about like, what is it that you can do to wake me up? What are we going to say? What are you going to do? And usually that comes out of just like having these conversations with people. Like, where can we just drop someone in the middle of the action to bring them to the edge of their seat? And that's like, it's a hard thing to do, right? But it's either you are going to use dialogue or you're going to use descriptive terms or descriptive words to create that image, but it's hard and it can be sometimes a distractor. So I have people just work on that part last. So just in order of things to do.
That's so amazing to hear. I also don't like writing quotes whenever I had about essays, because I felt like it was just really important. Does not sound really personable. And for people who are non-traditional applicants, is there a different approach you recommend them in tackling their personal statement? Is there anything they need to address that because they're a non-traditional applicant versus a traditional applicant, or like your thoughts on that? Yeah.
Yeah, I think as a non-traditional applicant, you like if I'm reading your application, I'm going to have the question of why don't you want to stay in your career and why do you think medicine is going to be better? So I if it's not in the personal statement, and it doesn't have to be, but it kind of should be just talking about your experience and what you've done outside of medicine and why that's not fitting. If you wanted to, you could also put that in the experiences section of the actual application, and you make it like one of the most meaningful experiences, and you get a full paragraph or so to talk about why that wasn't the best fit. But if I was reading somebody who is a non-trad, like I would try the question burning on my mind, it would be, why would medicine be a better fit for you? So I would try and address that.
Yeah, I'm in agreement. I think there's so many people that are non-traditional, and then you find out that the non-traditionals that they just took a gap year to take a post back. That's fine. Like I don't think you have to even like go too deeply into that, except I would say that in any space where you've spent a year or more doing something else, you do want to describe or talk about it. So I would talk about it somewhere. But if your non-traditional path is that like you just took a gap year, I think that like unless the gap year is like super big or super memorable, you wouldn't need to have to like squeeze it into your personal statement. I do agree with Andrew that it should be somewhere where you talk about it, but you don't necessarily have to put it in the PS.
It's great to hear. I think now that the trend is shifting to having people taking more gap years, it definitely alleviates worries about that. And so talking more about the timeline of a personal statement, when would you start saying that people should start brainstorming, start putting their ideas on paper for writing a personal statement?
Yeah, I think it's it's a good question. I think if you can start in like February or so of the cycle, the earlier the better. I always say with the personal statement, just because you're going to go through so many iterations. Um, Ideally, you want to have things ready and like to be out kind of that first week of when the primary app is open. So you want to have a good like 3 to 4 months, I would say, of just like from starting with nothing just to so you can have multiple options to refine it. If you or later than that, that's no problem. You can write it in a month. It's just a little bit more stressful, I think. It kind of takes away or it adds to that time pressure that doesn't always help with the stress of applying to med school. So yeah, a couple months.
Yeah, I agree. And I would actually say that like if you can just like right now, even at the end of this entire, like maybe end of day two, you like think of all your anecdotes, all the experiences you've had, and just make a list of them and just a short, like, oh, I was in the hospital this one day and I talked with this guy named Joe. This is what happened. This is what I think about XYZ. Make a bunch of those types of like shorthand anecdote reminders. It not only helps with the personal statement writing, but it also helps when you're thinking about interview preparation, because then you already have anecdotes to draw from. So it's never too soon to just start making that running list. But I'm in agreement with Andrew that I give yourself a couple months because you're going to go through many iterations of this personal statement.
It's really great to talk about iterations because we had a question related to iterations, and specifically, how many different people would you recommend should look through your personal statement, and who should those people be?
Oh, great question. I had so many different people. I had people that were physicians read it, and sometimes they want to read it because they want to kind of get a better sense of who you are, especially if they're going to be writing you a recommendation letter. Even if it's like your professor or whatever, they're probably going to want to read it too, so they can write your rec letter. So they might read it, but they might not give you any feedback on it. I had my high school English teacher read for me. I had a really good like bond with her, and she's an English teacher. So she was like very into editing and like grammatical correction and whatnot. But I also shared it with like my mom, with some of my some trusted classmates. And then I also was like part of a working group of friends who also just like traded personal statements and read each other's and saw what emotions came out of it, what vibes came out of it, and like, is this good? And can I give you like helpful feedback? So as many people that you safely and confidently feel comfortable sharing it with, I think is what I would just like go for.
Yeah, I always say minimum of three. So the first person should be somebody who knows you really well and makes sure that your personal statement is kind of in line with who you are as a person. Second person should be someone like your English teacher. I didn't have mine. I was close enough, I guess, with my high school English teacher to have her to read mine. But somebody who's writes very well and can just give you those grammatical corrections. And then the third person, who I think is probably the most important person, is just somebody like a physician or somebody who can just be objective, and just tell you like, can like confidently say like, no, this is bad, without hurting your feelings, or this is really great. And so I think that the most helpful feedback I got from my personal statements was all of the bad feedback, right? And it's like the feedback that nobody really wants to give. So you want somebody who you trust to give that bad feedback. So that's a really, really important person to have.
And I'm also going to add that Andrew kind of already went into an order in which you should give these essays out. I wouldn't give everybody the first iteration because you're going to change it, improve on it, and you can't have the same person reading 30 versions of this, right? So after you write the first one, I would give it to that first person who knows who you are really well, so they can say, okay, the content of this, is this even good? Is this reflective of you? And maybe have 2 or 3 people or like that one person read it maybe once or twice and make sure the content's okay. And then once the content's good, I would then give it to my grammar person and say, grammatically, is this great? Does it fit the word count? XYZ, great. And now that I have a final copy, then I would give it to a physician, or I give it to someone that like can objectively say, is this a good personal statement? Would this be a solid piece to your application? So think about the order. Don't just give everybody the first draft, because you're going to wear them out. You're going to tire them, and like they're not going to want to look at
Definitely.
the final one, right?
Yeah.
Right. No, that's amazing to hear that there's that order to do. There's multiple drafts that you're going to be going through. And then I think the last question, kind of wrap up the Q&A session. What did you do during this writing process, during the application process that's outside of school that helped you kind of stay sane? Stay sane, stay happy, or feeling not as burnt out from the entire application process?
Yeah, I think it depends on how you look at writing. I think the reason I had a good relationship with my English teacher is because I loved writing. And I think at some point when I was like going through drafts, I'm a very like physical learner. So I actually cut up my personal statement. It was a bunch of paper on the ground, on the table, and I would just move the lines around and like physically move those paragraphs around and be like, this is good. This sounds good. Or this is a very compelling essay. And then I would like edit it on the computer. That kind of worked for me, but I was like, this is kind of crazy and it's a little bit too much. But like I enjoyed writing and I loved like thinking about stories and moving them around physically, and that helped me a lot. I also think the reason we say give yourself a couple months is because you don't want to work on something straight for 30 days. That freaking sucks. And like you're going to be tired and you're not going to be excited about it anymore. So if you work on it for like a week, you give yourself another week of a break to like be fresh, reset, and come back to it again.
Yeah, definitely. And then like stick to whatever, wellness routine you have. So mine is like going on runs or like going to the gym or what have you, like and hanging out with friends. So like it is a stressful time, applying for med school, writing your personal statement, getting your whole application together. If you have friends that are like going through it together, like there's no harm in just like sitting down together at the library or coffee shop or whatever, and like, hey, I'm gonna work on this for 30 minutes while you do it, and then like we can switch, or there's a lot of people applying to med school. I used to have those stats in my head, but I lost those stats. But there's a lot of people who are applying. There's a lot of people going through it. I'm sure you can, find a couple friends or colleagues that are going through it with you as well. So everything's easier when you're together. In medicine, it's a team sport. That is something that Actually, it's probably a good thing to include in your personal statement. That speaking of it, like being a team player, that's like one of the biggest things that med schools look at. So last final tip there.
No, I like that, emphasizing that it's a team collaboration instead of competition. But yeah, thank you so much, Lois and Andrew, for coming and sharing with us your tips, advice, and also like very like personal advising sessions you had that kind of help our audience in crafting their statement. And also thanking to everyone for attending this wonderful session with our Inspira Advantage medical students. This is our last session for day 1. So please make your way to the closing remarks, leaving this webinar to wrap up officially our day 1 of conference.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you guys so much. Yeah.